In 1943, a group of battle-weary German POWs arrives at a Louisiana work camp, expecting the harsh treatment they'd heard about in Allied captivity. Assigned to labor in the rice fields near Edgerly under Cajun guards, they brace themselves for meager rations and brutal conditions. But when their guards invite them to a traditional midnight crawfish boil, a raucous communal feast filled with laughter, music, and more food than they've seen in years, the prisoners face an unexpected dilemma. How do you reconcile the humanity of your captors with everything you've been taught about the enemy? As the aroma of spiced crawfish fills the humid Louisiana night, these men must confront whether survival means more than just staying alive. The air hung thick and stale within the train car, a suffocating blanket of dread woven from the metallic tang of sweat, unwashed bodies, and lingering fear. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of steel on steel was a relentless soundtrack to their captivity, a monotonous drumbeat marking the passage to an unknown, surely grim, fate. Klaus Richter, once a proud Wehrmacht sergeant, now little more than a ghost in a stained uniform, stared blankly out a window streaked with grime. The world outside was a blur of featureless American landscapes, each passing mile deepening the despair etched on the faces of the men crammed around him. Dieter Schmidt, his corporal's uniform barely less disheveled than Klaus's, a man whose stern features usually bore the unyielding stamp of Nazi ideology, attempted to impose order on the chaos. "Sing, men. A German song. We are soldiers of the Reich." His voice, however, cracked with an unusual strain, and the few mumbled responses died quickly, swallowed by the carriage's oppressive silence. Morale was not merely low, it had been utterly vanquished, replaced by a hollow emptiness that no anthem could fill. Johann Müller, barely 19, clutched a worn photograph of his family, his knuckles white. His youth, still clinging to an innocence that felt tragically out of place, made his fear palpable. He looked up, his eyes wide and searching, a flicker of curiosity momentarily eclipsing the terror. Klaus's internal monologue was a cynical echo of their shared desperation. We expected to die hungry. That's what the propaganda had promised, hadn't it? The Americans brutal, vengeful. They would grind us down, starve us out. This was the inevitable conclusion. Yet the grim certainty offered no comfort, only a bitter resignation. Each clanking of the train car's wheels seemed to count down not just the miles, but the days, until their bodies would succumb to the prophecies of their own fearful minds. The silence that followed Dieter's failed attempt at a sing-along was heavier than any conversation, a collective acknowledgement of their shared bleak expectations. Hours later, the train shuddered to a halt, and the men were roughly herded into open-backed trucks, their bodies jostling against each other. Camp Ruston, Louisiana, emerged from the humid haze like a mirage of torment. Under a scorching, unforgiving sun, a vast, dusty compound stretched before them, a brutal geometry of barbed wire fences, menacing guard towers, and rows of dilapidated wooden barracks. The air, thick with the heavy humidity of the South, carried the unfamiliar, earthy smell of the land, alien and menacing. The processing was swift and dehumanizing. Stripped, deloused, then issued scratchy, ill-fitting uniforms that offered no comfort. They felt the last vestiges of their former identities flayed away. Captain Jenkins, the American camp commander, a man whose face was set in efficient, by-the-book lines, delivered a curt, monotonous speech about rules and expectations. His voice held no inflection, no discernible emotion, a chilling detachment that only reinforced the POW's fears. As they were assigned to their barracks, 2 guards oversaw the process. Billy Joe, a man in his 40s, his face weathered by sun and toil, his eyes missing nothing, yet holding a certain weary depth, and Antoine Broussard, younger, more boisterous, his initial expressions hinting at a deep-seated resentment for the damn Krauts, a resentment he expressed in rapid, guttural Cajun French to his comrades. Dieter, ever defiant, attempted to assert his authority over a group of disoriented men, barking orders in German. His effort was swiftly met by a firm shove from a burly American guard, a silent, powerful assertion of who held the true power here. Johann flinched, visibly terrified, shrinking into himself. Klaus, though outwardly stoic, felt a familiar knot of dread tighten in his stomach. The sight of the camp, its desolate landscape punctuated by the unforgiving sun, was a physical manifestation of his bleakest predictions. The first meal, a bland, watery gruel, served in dented metal bowls, felt like a deliberate confirmation of their fear of starvation, a meager mockery of sustenance. Every spoonful tasted of despair. The following days bled into weeks, marked by the relentless rhythm of the rice fields. The work was arduous, unfamiliar, and unforgiving. Under the relentless sun, the POWs were driven to exhaustion, their bodies quickly succumbing to the unfamiliar climate and diet. The fields stretched endlessly, muddy and shimmering with heat, the distant hum of farm machinery, and the ceaseless drone of cicadas serving as a constant reminder of their captivity. Klaus, ever the strategist, attempted to organize his men, hoping to find some efficiency in the back-breaking labor of planting and harvesting, a small act of defiance against their circumstances. Dieter, pushing himself beyond his limits, worked with a grim determination, silently challenging his captors with every swing of his tool. Johann, less robust than the others, struggled, often stumbling under the heavy loads, his face streaked with mud and sweat. Billy Joe and Antoine, along with other guards, watched over them. Billy Joe, a man of few words, would occasionally correct a technique with a precise, almost weary gesture, his instructions clear despite the language barrier. Antoine, on the other hand, would crack jokes with his fellow guards, his booming laughter echoing across the fields, sometimes, Klaus suspected, at the expense of the German prisoners, though the words were lost to them. Klaus, during rare moments of reprieve, observed the local farmers working nearby, their movements efficient, their bodies seemingly adapted to the brutal heat and humidity. He saw a harmony in their labor, a connection to the land that he and his men, forced into this foreign rhythm, could only mimic with desperate effort. The constant presence of mud, sweat, and gnats became the defining sensation of their days, mingling with the distinct, earthy smell of the rice fields, a scent that was a world away from the familiar forests and cities of Europe. Nights in the barracks offered no true respite. Dimly lit by a single flickering lantern, the air heavy with the collective sighs of exhausted men, sleep was a fitful, elusive companion. Bodies lay on thin, scratchy cots, but minds remained restless, tormented by gnawing hunger and memories of a life that felt impossibly distant. Whispers filled the darkness, fragments of conversations about home, about wives and children, about the war that had brought them to this unforgiving corner of the world. Dieter, even in the dimness, clung to his ideology, attempting to stir political rhetoric, but his words fell flat, hollow against the stark reality of their empty stomachs. Johann, curled on his cot, shared a quiet memory of a childhood meal, his voice hushed with longing. Klaus, eyes shut tight, tried to conjure the taste of German bread, the firm crust, the soft interior, a memory so potent it brought a phantom ache to his jaw. Dieter, disgusted, dismissed such talk as sentimental weakness, another sign of their degenerating resolve. Yet, even his stern facade seemed unable to fully block out the persistent rumbling of his own stomach. Klaus noticed occasionally a faint, unfamiliar music drifting from the direction of the guard quarters, a strange, lively blend of fiddle and accordion, accompanied by a chorus of voices. He dismissed it, focusing on his hunger, on the cold, hard fact of their confinement. We will surely die hungry here, the thought echoed, a stark, inescapable truth that dominated every thought, every whispered conversation. The relentless heat continued to oppress them. One particularly brutal day in the rice fields, Johann, weakened by the meager rations and ceaseless labor, stumbled. His legs, trembling with exhaustion, gave way, and he collapsed into the thick, muddy water, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Billy Joe, who had been watching the group with his usual quiet intensity, reacted with surprising speed. He moved quickly, bypassing standard protocol, reaching Johann's side in a few long strides. He knelt, his weathered hand on the young man's shoulder, a gruff, low voice cutting through Johann's gasps. "Here, boy. Drink." He offered his canteen, not the communal bucket, but his personal flask of cool water. Klaus watched, a jolt of surprise running through him. The gesture was simple, yet profound, utterly unexpected. Dieter, witnessing the scene, scowled, his face a mask of disapproval. He saw only weakness, a dangerous fraternization with the enemy. Johann, grateful beyond words, drank deeply, the water a cool balm to his parched throat. In that moment, Klaus's carefully constructed notions about the enemy began to crack, subtly but perceptibly. Dieter's rigid ideology clashed with the raw, undeniable reality of human compassion, a silent battle playing out in the oppressive heat of the rice field. The shared canteen, passed between captor and prisoner, became a small, unexpected bridge across the chasm of war, a fleeting moment of connection. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in bruised purples and oranges, Klaus and Johann were assigned to latrine duty, a task usually relegated to the lowest in the pecking order. Their designated area was near the camp perimeter, where the rough, dusty road leading to the guard quarters began. From this vantage point, the sounds from the guards area were clearer, louder, infused with a festive energy that seemed entirely out of place in their grim reality. The distinct, lively melody of a fiddle and an accordion, intertwined with bursts of boisterous singing and laughter, carried on the humid air. And then there was the smell. A rich, spicy aroma, utterly alien and intoxicating, drifted over the barbed wire fence. It was the scent of something cooking, something substantial and deeply savory, utterly unlike the bland, watery slop served in the camp mess. Johann, despite himself, was captivated. His young face, usually etched with fear, now wore an expression of childlike wonder, his head cocked, listening intently. Klaus, despite his own efforts to remain aloof, felt a sudden, intense pang of longing. His stomach, always growling, seemed to ache with a new, sharper pain. He tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it as mere crude American fare, unworthy of his attention. But the smells, pungent with unfamiliar spices, and the lively foot-tapping rhythms, hinted at a vibrant world beyond their reach, a world that pulsed with life and pleasure. Through a gap in the fence they glimpsed Antoine and Billy Joe, their faces alight with laughter, carrying a large, heavy net. They conversed in a rapid, fluid language, clearly not English, their voices rising and falling in a melodic cadence. The net, whatever its contents, seemed to confirm that something significant was afoot in the guard quarters. The intoxicating foreign smells and sounds were a source of both torment and fascination, whispering of a feast, a celebration, a life that existed just beyond their understanding, a world they could only dream of. Few days later, back in the endless monotony of the rice fields, a crucial piece of farming equipment, a cumbersome, rusted contraption, sputtered and died. The work ground to a halt. The American guards, including Billy Joe and Antoine, struggled with it, their faces growing increasingly frustrated under the glare of the Louisiana sun. They prodded, cursed, and pulled, but the machine remained stubbornly inert. Klaus, a pre-war mechanic who had once taken immense pride in the intricate workings of engines, watched their futile efforts. He understood the machine's mechanics, the subtle rhythm of its gears, the likely point of failure. After a moment's hesitation, a quiet internal debate between pride and pragmatism, he gestured, a tentative offer of assistance. Billy Joe, after a quick, almost imperceptible glance towards Captain Jenkins, who was observing from a distance with an impassive expression, gave a reluctant nod. He allowed Klaus to approach the broken machine. Klaus moved with a quiet confidence, his fingers, despite their calluses, surprisingly delicate as he probed the mechanism. He efficiently identified the problem, a minor but crucial misalignment, and with a few swift, practiced movements, he rectified it. The machine coughed, then roared to life, its gears grinding back into their accustomed rhythm. Billy Joe's initial skepticism transformed into a rare, almost imperceptible nod of appreciation. Dieter, witnessing Klaus's collaboration with the enemy, was visibly angry. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed in disapproval. Klaus met his gaze, a silent retort. "This is about survival, Dieter, not ideology." The shared moment of competence, a brief, wordless exchange of respect, felt like another subtle breach in the wall that separated them. As the sun began its descent, painting the dusty horizon in hues of amber and rose, the POWs were marched back from the fields, their bodies aching, their minds numb with exhaustion. They neared the entrance of the camp, the familiar, suffocating familiarity of the barbed wire looming before them. It was then that Billy Joe and Antoine approached Klaus, their expressions unreadable, a blend of casualness and an almost solemn intent. Antoine, whose usual boisterousness was tempered by an uncharacteristic earnestness, cleared his throat. In halting English, mixed with the unfamiliar liquid sounds of Cajun French, he spoke. "Tonight, we got something special. Big boil. You boys, if you want to come, eat. Just for tonight. No tricks. Just food." He gestured with a broad, almost awkward sweep of his arm towards the distant, faintly glowing lights of the Cajun settlement. Klaus was stunned. The words hung in the humid air, an impossible offer that defied all logic, all expectation. Dieter, who had been walking a few paces behind, immediately scoffed, a sneer twisting his lips. "A trap! It's a trick, Richter." Johann, however, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperate primal hunger, looked directly at Klaus, a silent plea in his gaze. Klaus debated, his mind racing through the implications. The risks were immense. A potential escape attempt, an ambush, a cruel joke. But then he remembered Johann's collapse, the gnawing hunger that had become a constant companion, the bland gruel that barely sustained them. He looked at Billy Joe, whose gaze was steady and unwavering, his expression holding a quiet honesty. He saw no malice, no deceit, only a simple, almost shy invitation. After a long, agonizing moment, weighing the crushing weight of pride against the desperate needs of his men, Klaus made a decision that felt both reckless and profoundly necessary. He nodded, a single firm movement of his head. "We will come. Thank you." The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of a monumental choice. The sheer audacity of the invitation, the desperate hunger of the POWs had, for a fleeting moment, overridden ingrained suspicion and fear. The air hummed with a nervous anticipation, a mixture of terror and an almost unbearable hope for the simple comfort of a real meal. The Louisiana night swallowed them whole, a humid, inky canvas alive with the chorus of crickets and frogs, punctuated by the distant bluesy wail of a saxophone from somewhere unseen. Klaus, Johann, Dieter, and a handful of other chosen POWs walked in a nervous, silent file, following Billy Joe and Antoine down a narrow, unpaved path that snaked away from the oppressive glow of the camp. The guards walked ahead, their weapons either casually slung or, more unnervingly, entirely absent. The unspoken trust, or perhaps recklessness of their captors was palpable. Whispers of apprehension rippled through the German ranks. Dieter, ever the ideologue, walked with a rigid, almost military posture, his eyes ceaselessly scanning the dense foliage that pressed in on either side of the path, alert for any sign of ambush, any indication of the trap he was certain awaited them. Johann, his young face pale in the dim light, clutched Klaus's arm, his grip surprisingly tight, a mixture of fear and desperate, hopeful hunger radiating from him. Klaus, despite the apprehension coiling in his gut, felt an undeniable primal pull towards the enticing smells that now grew stronger with every step. The heavy, sweet scent of magnolias, hanging thick in the humid air, began to mingle with a sharper, savory aroma, pungent with boiling spices, cayenne, garlic, citrus. It was an intoxicating, almost disorienting blend, foreign yet undeniably alluring. The air hummed with unfamiliar night sounds, the rustling of unseen creatures, the distant, muffled echoes of music and laughter. Each step away from the harsh glare of the barbed wire felt both terrifying and strangely liberating, a journey into the heart of the unknown. Then, they arrived. The path opened into a large clearing, a vibrant explosion of light and sound that stunned the German prisoners into awestruck silence. Flickering torchlight cast dancing shadows against the surrounding trees, illuminating a scene of joyous, communal chaos. At its heart, a massive black pot, almost as tall as a man, sat over a roaring bonfire, billowing clouds of fragrant steam into the night. Around it, wooden tables groaned under the weight of freshly cooked corn cobs, steaming potatoes and thick slices of sausage. People laughed, their voices ringing with uninhibited merriment, as a lively fiddle and accordion duo played a foot-stomping tune, their music an infectious rhythm that seemed to compel movement. Children, unburdened by the cares of the world, chased each other through the crowd, their excited shrieks adding to the joyful din. The German POWs, stiff and wary in their drab uniforms, entered this vibrant tableau like specters from another world. Their rigid military postures, their gaunt faces etched with suspicion and deprivation, contrasted sharply with the relaxed, joyful atmosphere. The music faltered for a brief, awkward moment, as all eyes turned towards the unexpected newcomers. A collective hush fell over the gathering, a brief, pregnant pause. Then Maman Cécile, a woman whose face was a roadmap of life, her 70-odd years worn with grace, stepped forward. She wore a simple, flower-dusted dress and an apron, her hands gnarled but capable. Her smile, however, was unwavering, warm and genuine, reaching her kind, dark eyes. She gestured broadly, her arm sweeping across the laden tables, her voice, though speaking in Cajun French, needing no translation in its warmth. "Bienvenue, mes amis. Venez manger," she called out, then repeated in broken but earnest English, "Welcome, my friends. Come, eat." Johann, wide-eyed, a rare, tentative smile beginning to form on his lips, gazed at the scene with a mixture of disbelief and wonder. Dieter, however, remained visibly uncomfortable, his jaw tight, his eyes darting across the scene as if trying to decipher a complex, dangerous riddle. He struggled to process this unexpected, overwhelming display of warmth and abundance. Klaus, too, felt overwhelmed, but not by fear. He was bombarded by the sheer, vibrant humanity that pulsed around him, a stark, dizzying contrast to the sterile, dehumanizing world of the camp. The sight of so much food, piled high and steaming after months of gnawing scarcity, was almost physically painful in its overwhelming generosity. The sheer unreserved welcome, the abundance, the joy, it shattered his expectations, making him doubt the very fabric of his reality. The sheer abundance of food, piled high and steaming, was almost too much for the POWs to comprehend. They hesitated, unsure how to approach the mounds of bright red crawfish, their exoskeletons gleaming under the torchlight. Billy Joe, sensing their awkwardness, stepped forward. With a patient, practiced ease, he picked up a steaming crawfish, demonstrating the ritual. He pinched the tail, twisted, peeled away the shell, then, with a satisfied sigh, sucked the succulent head. "Pinch, peel, suck," he instructed, his hands moving with the quick, precise movements of a man intimately familiar with the sacred rite. Antoine, his earlier gruffness replaced by boisterous encouragement, let out a hearty laugh. "Come on, boys, don't be shy." Johann, his initial awe giving way to an almost childlike eagerness, was the first to tentatively reach for one. His eyes, now gleaming with a rare, unadulterated joy, mirrored the anticipation. He fumbled with the shell, his brow furrowed in concentration, before finally extracting a morsel of meat. He tasted it, his face lighting up with an expression of pure delight. Others, emboldened by his reaction, slowly followed suit, their initial stiffness melting away under the infectious warmth of the Cajun hospitality. Even Dieter, after a long, internal, agonizing moment of rigid resistance, his face a mask of strained discomfort, finally, reluctantly, reached for a crawfish. Laughter erupted around the tables as the POWs, clumsy and unsure, fumbled with the unfamiliar crustaceans. Simple words, a mix of broken English and German, were exchanged, accompanied by gestures of encouragement and shared amusement. Klaus, his initial hesitation long forgotten, dug into the feast. The explosion of taste, the spicy kick, the underlying sweetness, the warmth spreading through his belly, was overwhelming, almost spiritual. This is life, he thought, tears unexpectedly stinging his eyes. It was more than just food. It was a connection to something vital and profoundly human. Dieter's face, though still etched with its customary sternness, softened for a fleeting moment, a flicker of genuine pleasure crossing his features as he too experienced the rich flavor. A moment of pure, unadulterated joy unfolded as Johann, shedding all his soldierly inhibitions, found himself awkwardly dancing with a giggling local child, his movements clumsy but sincere, the scene a poignant tableau of innocence reclaimed. It was a collective moment of shared humanity, where for a brief, luminous span, the barriers dissolved. They were no longer soldiers, prisoners, or enemies, but simply hungry men sharing a meal, experiencing a common, universal joy. As the midnight boil began to wind down, the bonfire settling into glowing embers and the mountains of crawfish slowly diminishing, A sense of satiated relaxation descended upon the clearing. The lively music softened to a gentle hum, and conversations, hesitant at first, began to flow more freely. Antoine, with surprising patience, found himself translating for Klaus and Billy Joe, bridging the linguistic divide. Stories were shared, simple tales of families, of the land, of traditions. Klaus, finding his voice amidst the warmth, spoke of his village in Germany, of the fertile farmlands and the fierce pride in their harvests, surprisingly finding common ground in the universal love for the land and family. Johann, his eyes still bright with the afterglow of the feast, spoke of his younger sister, of her playful nature and her love for storytelling. Billy Joe, in turn, shared tales of fishing the bayous, of navigating fierce hurricanes, of the resilience woven into the very fabric of Cajun life. Maman Cécile, her presence a comforting anchor, listened to their words, nodding sagely, her smile radiating understanding. Within Klaus, a silent, profound shift was occurring. He wrestled with the internal conflict, how to reconcile this overwhelming, profound kindness with the rigid propaganda and hatred that had been meticulously instilled in him and his comrades. The image of the enemy, a faceless, monstrous entity, crumbled under the weight of shared laughter and the taste of spice. He realized with a startling clarity that these people, his supposed enemies, were just as human, with the same hopes, the same fears, the same capacity for joy and suffering, as he and his men. Maman Cécile's voice, rising in a soft, melodic lullaby, drifted through the night air, bridging the language barrier with pure, unadulterated emotion, sealing the unexpected bond formed in the heart of Louisiana. As the first tendrils of pre-dawn mist began to curl around the cypress trees, cloaking the bayou in a silent, ethereal veil, the POWs were escorted back to Camp Rustin. The path that had buzzed with nervous energy hours before was now imbued with a quiet, reflective solemnity. The cheerful sounds of the crawfish boil, the lively music, the boisterous laughter, had faded into distant echoes, replaced by the persistent, rhythmic chirping of crickets and the soft rustle of unseen creatures. Klaus walked in a daze, the lingering taste of crawfish still a ghost on his tongue, a warm, foreign fullness in his belly that defied the persistent gnawing of institutional hunger. Dieter, usually so rigid in his defiance, was unusually quiet, his eyes distant, seemingly lost in thought. Johann, however, oblivious to the silence, softly hummed a fragment of a Cajun tune, its simple melody a bright, defiant spark in the solemn return. The sight of the barbed wire, the desolate barracks, the oppressive structure of the camp felt jarring and sterile after the vibrant, unconstrained warmth of the Cajun gathering. The silent return underscored a profound conflict, the jarring contrast between the vibrant human connection they had just experienced and the stark, dehumanizing reality of their imprisonment. The warmth, the music, the laughter, the sheer humanity of the boil clashed violently with the cold, hard impersonality of the camp. They were physically back within their cage, but their minds had traveled far beyond it. The lingering smell of the crawfish boil, a subtle aroma of spice and wood smoke clinging to their drab uniforms, served as a clandestine souvenir, a potent reminder of a night that had irrevocably challenged everything they thought they knew, a night that had left an indelible mark on their souls. The following morning in the barracks, a palpable change rippled through the confines. The men who had attended the boil, no longer ghosts, animatedly recounted their experience to their comrades. Their voices, usually muted by despair, now buzzed with an almost feverish excitement. There were stories of the monstrous pot, the strange red creatures, the explosion of flavors, the infectious music, and the overwhelming kindness of the Cajun people. Some of the POWs listened with skepticism, their faces etched with disbelief and envy, convinced it was a fabrication, a dream too good to be true. Others, less cynical, absorbed every detail with an almost desperate hunger for something beyond their grim reality. Dieter, though still maintaining his customary distance, stood apart, refusing to engage in the discussions. Yet, his rigid posture seemed to Klaus ever so slightly less so, a subtle softening around the edges of his usual defiance. Johann, his youth reborn by the experience, excitedly described the exotic taste of the crawfish, the joyous rhythm of the music, his words painting vivid pictures for the starved minds of his comrades. Klaus, more reserved, explained the genuine hospitality, the simple, heartfelt welcome that had transcended the language barrier. He found himself defending their decision to accept the invitation, arguing, quietly but firmly, for the shared humanity they had witnessed. The previously pervasive sentiment of, "we expected to die hungry," was now irrevocably tinged with the memory of unexpected plenty, a warmth that still resonated deep within their bellies and hearts. A quiet, profound ripple effect spread throughout the camp, a subtle shift in perspective for many. In the days and weeks that followed, a new, almost imperceptible dynamic began to emerge in the rice fields. The work resumed its grueling pace, but something had shifted. The guards, particularly Billy Joe and Antoine, seemed less prone to shouting, their commands delivered with a quieter authority. There was more eye contact, brief but meaningful glances exchanged between captor and prisoner. Billy Joe, in a moment of shared frustration over a clogged irrigation ditch, offered Klaus a small, practical piece of advice about clearing the blockage, his words spoken in a low, almost conspiratorial tone. Antoine, passing Johann with a heavy load of rice stalks, offered a quick, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement, a silent acknowledgement that transcended their assigned roles. Klaus, to his own surprise, occasionally found himself humming the fragment of the Cajun tune that Johann had picked up, its lively rhythm, a subconscious echo of the previous night's warmth. There were no overt conversations, no grand gestures of reconciliation, but a clear, unspoken sense of mutual respect had begun to form. Dieter, though still holding himself apart, his disapproval simmering beneath the surface, no longer barked at Klaus for his pragmatic interactions with the guards. The initial hostility had softened, replaced by a grudging acceptance of this strange, unwritten truce. The vast, muddy fields, once solely a symbol of back-breaking labor and despair, now held a faint, almost sacred memory of warmth and connection, a testament to the enduring power of empathy that had begun to penetrate the thickest walls of conflict. As the weeks turned into months, the seasons began their slow, inevitable shift in Camp Ruston. News, filtered through official channels and hushed whispers, began to reach the POWs. News of the war's progress, victories and defeats on distant fronts. The reality of their impending release or transfer, once a distant fantasy, began to loom, casting a new light on their captivity. The camp atmosphere shifted yet again, a complex blend of anxious hope for the future and an underlying apprehension about what awaited them in a broken Germany. The men discussed their future in hushed tones, wondering about their families, their homes, the world they had left behind. Johann, who had bloomed under the subtle shift in the camp's atmosphere, now less a fearful boy and more a resilient young man, wondered aloud if he would ever taste crawfish again, the memory of vivid culinary dream. Klaus, a man transformed, considered what stories he would tell his family, what truths he would choose to share about his time as a prisoner, about the extraordinary, unexpected kindness he had found in the heart of his enemy's land. The camp, once solely a symbol of pure suffering, now held a dual memory, of confinement and of an unforeseen grace. The day of their departure arrived with a quiet, almost understated finality. Trucks, their engines idling impatiently, lined up at the gates of Camp Ruston, ready to carry the POWs to the next stage of their journey, repatriation or transfer. The men who boarded them were different from the gaunt, despairing figures who had arrived months ago. They were cleaner, healthier, their uniforms still drab but their eyes holding a flicker of resilience. Billy Joe and Antoine stood among the American guards, their presence a familiar, comforting sight in the midst of farewells. There were no formal goodbyes, no grand pronouncements, but as Klaus passed, his eyes met Billy Joe's. A simple, sincere nod was exchanged, returned by Billy Joe with a slight, almost imperceptible smile. Antoine, ever more expressive, gave Johann a discreet thumbs up, a silent acknowledgement of their brief, shared moments of humanity. Even Dieter, for the first time, looked directly at Billy Joe, his usual scowl softened by a faint, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. It was a quiet, poignant moment of departure, the end of a chapter, but the clear beginning of a transformed perspective for them all. As the trucks pulled away, kicking up clouds of red dust, Klaus looked back, his gaze lingering on Billy Joe and Antoine. He no longer saw the enemy, but men who had, through a simple act of profound kindness, taught him an enduring lesson about humanity, a lesson that transcended the brutal realities of war. Years later, in the quiet, rain-streaked autumn of post-war Germany, the 1960s had begun to settle into a rhythm of rebuilding and remembering. An older, slightly stooped Klaus Richter, his once dark hair now a distinguished silver, stood in his modest kitchen. The air was fragrant not with the familiar scents of German cooking, but with something exotic, spicy, and deeply unfamiliar to his small, tidy home. He was teaching his young granddaughter, Liselle, a bright-eyed 6-year-old, how to chop an onion, his large, gnarled hands gently guiding her small ones. He was attempting to recreate a dish, a faint, cherished echo of Cajun cuisine, from memory, meticulously stirring a pot of simmering liquid on the stove. Liselle, her nose wrinkled at the pungent aroma, looked up at him. "Grandpa, what's that funny smell? And why are you putting so many red flakes in it?" Klaus smiled, a faraway, tender look in his eyes. He took a deep breath, the spices filling his senses, transporting him. He began to recount the story, his voice soft, almost a murmur, about the midnight crawfish boil in a faraway land. He spoke not of the war, not of the hunger that had gnawed at their bellies, but of the extraordinary, unexpected kindness of the Cajun people. He described the vibrant music, the boisterous laughter, the unforgettable taste of the crawfish, the feeling of shared humanity that had warmed him from the inside out. He pulled out a small, faded photograph from a worn wooden box, not a military portrait, but a crudely drawn sketch he'd made from memory, a vibrant depiction of the clearing, the bonfire, the dancing figures, a few red crawfish etched in the corner. He touched it reverently, the memory as vivid as the taste he still strove to recreate. He finally understood, truly, profoundly, that survival meant more than just staying alive. It meant holding on to humanity, cherishing the unexpected grace found in the most unlikely of places. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more compelling content. Your support helps us continue bringing you these narratives.